All
It's
right.
warming up. There we go.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming this morning. I appreciate you being back with us. Since we last met, we've had some shifting going on. We have our new board members have been seated. And so we always will continue to have two board members on this team. And it was before it was Andy Duran and Ann Hill. And now we're going to have Carrie Steinbach remain with us, and Ann Hill will be our two board members on the team. And of course, also bringing a parent perspective. We didn't have much in terms of updates 2 weeks ago, which is why we decided we probably didn't need to meet. And since then, some things have changed. I have some information to share and hopefully get some feedback. First and foremost, we're planning for fall. And at this point, we're planning for a pretty traditional, normal kind of year. Regular schedule, utilizing our buses to the capacity that we used to, having our related arts, and kind of just a much more traditional school year. At this point, since we have released the survey to our remote families asking how many will continue to stay remote, given the new guidance about needing to provide medical documentation for that accommodation, we currently only have 3 students who have indicated that they might be requesting a remote placement. We don't have any firm yeses. And so that means at this point, we have a very, very low number of students indicating that they will want to be remote for the year. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't have still students who need to access our instruction while they're at home due to a quarantine, which is still something that we're working through. However, as of yesterday, the Lake County Health Department has let us know that they've been given the blessing of the CDC and the Illinois Department of Health to begin a pilot program. The pilot program would begin on Monday if we would like to be interested in that. And essentially what that program is collecting some data around maybe a shifting definition of close contacts. So as we all know, the definition of close contacts hasn't changed. We have moved desks closer together between 3 and 6 feet, but until and still now, the definition of a close contact is less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, which means that whenever there's a positive case in the building, we have had to quarantine many children that would be seated around that child because they're less than 6 feet at this point, or on the bus, or in lunch and things like that. So this pilot program would allow us to not quarantine students who are close contacts in a classroom setting only. So essentially what they'd like to know is if we're doing all the other mitigations, including mask wearing for everyone, not having students here with symptoms and those kinds of things, that in a classroom setting where the students are 3 feet apart wearing masks, we would not have to quarantine the children that are within 6 feet. We would still have to quarantine children within 6 feet in a lunchroom setting or in a more unstructured setting like recess or gym or somewhere where they're moving around. And we know that they've been within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, even if they're masked. Obviously at lunch, they're not wearing masks. So the idea behind this pilot is to collect some data around whether or not students who are within that 6 foot radius are actually, contracting COVID in a classroom setting. And so I bring that here to the group to gather some feedback on it. We would still notify parents if their child fell within the actual definition of close contacts, and the parents would be given the option of whether or not to continue to send their child to school or keep them at home if they wanted to, but we would continue to notify them. Now, I just also received an article this morning that the McHenry County Department of Health has just officially reduced the quarantine distance to 3 feet. So I do see us shifting in that direction. And I do think that this is where we probably need to go to keep as many kids in school as possible. And we haven't luckily seen a lot of transmission in a classroom setting as we've been doing our contact tracing. So I wanted to bring it here to open it up for discussion and get any feedback if anyone has any thoughts on us participating in that pilot for the rest of the year.
I may only add to that and I would agree, Lisa, we haven't had a lot of situations where we might need to do that. We had a couple where we had been proactively thinking about who we would need to in the event that the student who we were concerned about had tested positive, for example. At the middle school, it's definitely a larger number because they are moving from class to class. So what we have to look at is in every classroom where a COVID positive student may have visited, how many were within 6 feet? That could be, 15 to 20 kids, depending upon who the student might be. So I definitely am in support of being part of that pilot, particularly if it mitigates sending more kids out than we have to. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Nate.
I'll piggyback on that, Nate. I agree with Nate. I like the pilot. This is all first blush. I'm just hearing about this too. But my initial reaction is I like this pilot idea. It is going to have less disruption for more kids, it sounds like. And so that's a bonus as we're trying to get closer and closer to normal school. One thought I had is if we'll still notify parents so they know that their kid was less than 6 feet to a positive class, would those parents have the option if they wanted to pull their kid and quarantine their kid for whatever days we do that now? Yeah. 10, 14,
so
whatever.
Our nurses would kind of give them the guidance that we would normally give and say, if we have the option, of letting them continue to come to school, but if you'd like to quarantine, then they would look at when the date of exposure was and kind of walk them through that whole process of what the normal quarantine time period would be, and the parent can certainly choose to exercise that option. If a child who is a close contact becomes symptomatic at any point, then obviously they need to quarantine and be isolated. But that is our policy anyway. We're still under that guidance. So if anyone is symptomatic with COVID-like symptoms, they need to stay home, and anyone in their household. This really, it really only pertains to that classroom space. So in other words, if a student has a person in their house that is COVID positive, they would still need to quarantine and stay home. This really is to just try to take the safest places, which at this point we believe are our classroom settings, and limit the number of students that are impacted if that happens in school.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say devil's advocate. I would love for my kids to be in school more, but could this run the risk that we have more exposures and more asymptomatic cases, and it could get, because we're not sure if it is the 6 feet or if it's not. And so therefore, if it gets out of hand, is there a point where we would pull out of the pilot program and go back to our regular?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's kind of the purpose of it. And I think that's something we would have to monitor. If all of a sudden we're seeing, okay, we're hearing from our folks, or they're becoming symptomatic, and then we're hearing that they're positive, then we would reevaluate and say, go back to our normal protocol. It's a voluntary pilot.
This is Nicole, and kind of along those lines, do we have any data that suggests when a person has been in the classroom, and I'm sorry if I did miss this, how frequently are those others also symptomatic who are quarantining per the current guidelines?
Yeah, so we have our own local data, and we have not had any cases where the only exposure was in a classroom and the student who was a close contact became positive after only a classroom exposure. And that is what is also happening in the county, which is why they feel comfortable to do it. So in other words, when there has been a close contact that has come down with COVID, there have been multiple exposures. It's not about it's not about, you know, just sitting in a classroom. There's been outside activities, or there's other places that they are interacting where there would be more contact than just in a classroom setting, which is, again, how it was presented to us yesterday on the call was, you know, we feel confident that our classrooms are safe. And there have been other counties and other places that have done this, and it's been okay. And so for us, it's more just, okay, can we try this for the end of the year and collect our own local data and before we make any decisions as a county? It's a great question.
Thanks. I mean, it seems reasonable.
I think it seems reasonable too, but I'm interested in how the teachers feel about this.
I was just going to say that I feel like, you know, this is the first time I've heard of it too, but I feel comfortable with it given two things. Number one, the data that suggests that there's not spread in school right now. I feel comfortable moving to that. And number two, I think it would give us a good chance to try it out in preparation for next year. And number three, actually, I'll add one to that. I think for teachers, it's really challenging having kids in and out and doing the hybrid, and especially in the middle school environment where some classrooms have moved to fully in person and some have moved to hybrid. It's challenging to manage that piece for, you know, the good of the learning experience for the child, as well as the delivery of instruction from the teacher perspective. So I feel like if we can minimize that disruption, that you know, at low risk to health or no risk to health, then I would be in support of that.
Thanks, Vanessa.
I would just like to add that if we participated in this pilot, and the other nurses and I talked about it yesterday, and we're all for moving forward with it. But if for some reason the situation arose that we thought there was really, for that particular situation, that there was a higher risk of transmission, we'd call it out and say, like, nope, we have to consider this on this one and this on this one, and no, it would be better to quarantine. So
Yeah,
that's the opportunity to look at it too.
Thanks, Kathy. That's a great point. This would not be a blanket, you don't have to, because the real criteria for being able to do this is as long as all the other mitigations were done with fidelity. So if we were to go ahead and do our investigating like we've been doing, and we realize that, say, the student who is positive actually isn't able to keep the mask on all the time, or there are times during the day when the student is getting up and walking around and taking the mask off for whatever reason, then we wouldn't consider that a situation that would be applicable here. Because the only way you can do it is if all the other things have been done with fidelity. Does that make sense? So it's only when masks have been worn, kids are 3 feet apart, we know we're sticking to our protocols, then you can say you have the option. But yeah, that's a great point, Kathy. Thanks. I do think it's worth noting, you know, we do have some kiddos who have a hard time with keeping the mask up. You know, our teachers have been great about not only reminding and supporting students with that, but also just noticing when that's the case. And so we've all been through enough of these investigations and trying to find the close contacts to know what to pay attention to and what to look for. And so I feel really confident that we've done this enough times that we can make good decisions here with regard to this piece. Any other thoughts on that, or any objections or thoughts about not sure that this is the right time?
I think we're better off doing it now that we're already used to the, you know, kids moving back and forth and we already have our platform set up, than if we're looking towards the fall being more, you know, typical. That seems too late. So now would be the time to try and work out all the logistics and whatever, since we already kind of do a lot of that now.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a good point.
One additional thought I have is I just wonder if we have enough time to truly understand if this will work, because as my child informed me, there's 18 days of school left. So I think an incubation period is 10 to 14 days, and maybe that's 18 school days. I don't know exactly. I haven't looked. But that would just be one thing to consider. We might have to follow those post school to really understand if there was any risk as well.
That's a great point. Yeah. And it was a surprise to all of us superintendents yesterday that this came up, and that it was coming up so quickly as to start on Monday. The reason the county wants to do it now, many counties around us are considering it for the summer. But summer school programming typically has much fewer has much less students attending. And so you can space those kids 6 feet apart. And so why wouldn't you? And their thought was, as long as we have schools in session at 3 to 6 feet, we might as well give it a try and collect what we can. But I think you're right. If we do have cases more towards the end, those last couple of weeks, we can do some follow-up and make sure that those families let us know if anything happens.
Monday would be 23 calendar days from the end of the school year for students.
Thanks, Tim. Anything else on this or anything else? Any other questions or thoughts, things that you've been thinking about or questions that you have?
How are we communicating this to, if people hadn't had a chance to watch this? And like you said, if it starts Monday, I just think, how are we communicating that to everybody?
So I think that's a good question, something I've been thinking about. I think that this will probably be communicated on a case-by-case basis, because not everyone is going to come into this, is going to have to deal with this situation, and parents still have a choice of whether or not they would like to participate, if that makes sense. So all of our protocols will remain the same, except if you're a close contact, you might have a choice to keep sending your child. And that would be the only difference. And we haven't, luckily, had too many of those cases. But I'm happy to take thoughts on if we feel like this should be a full communication to families.
I would agree that it should be a one-off instance, because I think an email like this would confuse and create some mass panic because you don't read the entire email usually. So there would be a lot of extra questions. So this is very helpful to understand it, but I think when it's put into words, it might be a little more difficult for everybody.
I think I agree. If we get another case, then that would be sort of the opportunity or timing to prompt the communication with applicable families.
I agree with that too.
Thanks. We're doing really well in terms of our numbers in the county too. And we've kind of seen that reflected here, which is good. The vaccines are getting out, and we're seeing that impact us in a good way. So I think that's also helpful. Principals, anything you'd like to add, or any reminders or anything you'd like to talk through?
Maybe the only thing that I would put out there to review, I've gotten a few questions from parents asking about mask wearing and the likelihood of that still being a requirement when we return in the fall. It might be helpful to just sort of explain, how those decisions are made. And I've responded to most to say that I don't know definitively yet, but that I think is a common question that's being asked.
Thanks for that. At this point, mask wearing is in our future for a while. I haven't gotten any guidance to the contrary from the health department, nor has the CDC come out with anything indicating that indoor activities for unvaccinated folks, you should not be wearing a mask. And even to that extent, some of the guidance that's out around unvaccinated or vaccinated people being able to be around other vaccinated people indoors, we're still being told that that is not applicable to workplaces and schools. So even though the majority of our staff, the vast majority of our staff are fully vaccinated, we still use masks in school settings when only adults are present, because that is still the guidance that we're under. I can tell you, as everyone knows, this situation is shifting every day, just like it has for the last, 16 months. I just read an article yesterday that mask wearing might be reevaluated by the CDC. I would just stay tuned because I think this summer will be very telling. There'll be a lot of decisions being made based on how many folks in a given area have taken advantage of the vaccinations, and things may change because of that. So I can only say what I know right now, and right now masks are still the mandate. But I will say we have looked at the mitigation strategies that we do have in place. The one thing we've decided as an administrative team to adjust for the fall is to take down the plexiglass shields. I know that as we've moved to more in-person instruction, those have become difficult for kids if they need to see, each other or a board or the teacher, that those have become a barrier to the in-person learning experience. And so those will be taken down over the summer. But the desks will remain at 3 feet, and we'll continue with all of our other mitigation strategies that we've had in place all year.
And I think just on behalf of the elementary school, we are continuing to bring some students in each week as families' situations change. So there are students shifting from remote to in-person. The majority of grade levels do have the space for that. I would say our kindergarten is the most maxed out in terms of in-person, just for families that might still be considering that. Please reach out if you want to talk through what that could look like for your child. And then let's just all bring on the warm, sunny weather, because I think being able to get outside and enjoy that has really been helpful. And I think that continues to motivate and keep engagement as high as possible during a time of year where we're all just looking towards kind of the end. But I continue to be really proud of our students and their ability to persevere and show resilience, and the same for staff and substitutes. Just a shout out to the subs here at LBES. I put daisies on each of their desks this morning because we wouldn't really be able to make it through without the help of those subs that are remaining, as well as just the flexibility of staff, because we are continuing to work that Rubik's Cube and puzzle every morning to make sure that every student has a teacher that they need to have for safety supervision and instruction. So thank you.
If you haven't or weren't able to watch the board meeting, I'll run quickly through. We do have a lot of end of the year activities that are going to be happening. We have our book fair at LBES the first week in June. Our 8th grade promotion ceremony is Monday, June 7th. That committee is reconvening soon to talk through any adjustments we might be able to make given the new guidance. 5th grade picnic on June 7th, 5th grade clap off on June 9th. The middle school will be doing a 5th grade virtual tour. And the reason it's virtual in this spring is just because we still have so many folks at home, and we want to make sure that's a experience that feels the same for everyone. But in the fall, when the kids come back, there will be a good opportunity for them to get into the building and walk their schedules and get to their lockers and things. We will have our 3rd annual Kid to Kid experience on June 8th. Field days at ES on June 2nd through the 4th. And obviously we're doing our ABC countdown. So there's still a lot going on, and there's a lot of fun end of the year activities that we're trying to keep those traditions alive and as normal as possible, which I think is awesome. And I appreciate the parents and teachers and administrators who have worked really hard to adjust as usual, everything that we've been doing, but try to get those end of the year activities going for the kids so we can celebrate.
Dr. Leali, I do have one question, and this might be too much of a topic for the last 5 minutes, but I think it could affect this group, is that HB 2789. I mean, I was reading about that, and that's quite concerning in terms of the potential bill on the table in the state. Has there been any discussion about that?
All right, I'm going to have to remind myself which one that is because there's a few of them out there.
It's the one mandating, basically the state can dictate the in-school option for districts and take away kind of some of the local flexibility. And it seems to be for both private and public.
Yeah,
And
one with the disaster declaration that the remote would be an option.
it extends beyond that. And I mean, I am not super familiar, but I read enough and I was like, this could be, you know, it passed through one section, and I shouldn't speak too thoroughly about it because I only read, but I didn't know if that was a topic amongst, you know, other superintendents or.
Yeah,
not.
I mean, we've been watching really closely what is going to come down the pike in terms of remote instruction and flexibility. Obviously, before this pandemic started, we were given the flexibility to not have emergency days and to use e-learning days, if you remember, for weather-related emergencies, but we had to have a special plan in place so that we could use those. I think things are still up in the air with regard to what happened this year. I think the concern right now is that we've lost some kids. You know, I don't think we see it as much in K-8 districts, but high schools are very, very concerned about the number of students that have been remote and haven't been coming to school or haven't been engaging, and they feel like they've really lost a lot of kids. And so the discussion is about, you know, what is the balance here? Because for some kids, especially in high school, this was a great experience to be able to be remote and do other things, or maybe that was the right learning platform for them. But again, it's about balancing that need with, we know it's best to have kids in school. So we'll keep on top of it. I don't have any updates right now on that, but
Yeah,
keep a watch.
I mean, that one's one to watch because it's kind of indicating that, you know, there's a strong enough force to like want to dictate away from keeping kids in school is my interpretation of it. But I think it's just something we should all brush up on and keep a close eye on.
Appreciate that. There's a few different House bills that are a little concerning right now that we've been watching. And just for anybody who's interested, you can go to the Illinois General Assembly and see this information, and you can certainly file witness slips or give your opinion opposing or supporting bills. You know, I've contacted our representative multiple times in the last couple of weeks about some issues regarding consolidation. There was a bill up for unstructured playtime, 60 minutes a day for all students in K-8 that is still in committee and undergoing amendments. And so there's a lot of change that people are proposing right now as we come out of this. And it's hard to keep a tabs on all of it, but appreciate everyone kind of looking into those things and keeping on top of it. Anything else for today? All right, I want to thank everyone for coming. It is 9:29, so I'm giving you 1 minute back in your schedule. And as always, if you have any questions or thoughts after this, please email us or give us a call. And